very, very much for coming along and being so tolerant of a room that's capacity is not quite 60. You're all great to have come along and to have squeezed in. I'm Charlotte Leslie. I'm the Director of the Conservative Middle East Council. And we meet at an extraordinary time. News is breaking even as we speak, and by the time we leave this room, it could well be the case that events have travelled further. So on this occasion, I am particularly delighted to be joined by some very esteemed experts. Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mayall is former advisor to the Ministry of Defence and an author. May I recommend to you his most recent book, The House of War, which sets out a fascinating journey of 1300 years of Christendom and the Caliphate, which actually forms so much of the backdrop of what we're seeing today. Nicholas Hopton is our former ambassador to Qatar, Yemen and Iran. So there's very little he doesn't know, and now is reinvigorating, revamping the Middle East Association, which has probably never been more needed, focusing on commerce, trade and relationships. Our chairman, the Right Honourable Alistair Burt, needs no introduction, one of the most respected now former parliamentarians and Minister for the Middle East for many, many years. And Lina Khatib, who is an Associate Fellow of Chatham House. Alistair, if I may hand over to you as chair.
Chinese interesting, I think. Traffic is terrible. Well, I don't know where else it's coming from.
Yeah, it's right.
He's in it here already.
Yeah, he is.
Seen him.
I think it's.
Yeah, I think he's trapped somewhere.
Yeah, I think so. I'm Charlotte Leslie. I'm the Director of the Conservative Middle East Council, and I am pretending to be Alistair Burt until he's able to arrive. We meet at an extraordinary time. News is breaking even as we speak, and by the time we leave this room, it could well be the case that events have travelled further. So on this occasion, I am particularly delighted to be joined by some very esteemed experts. Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mayall is former advisor to the Ministry of Defence and an author. May I recommend to you his most recent book, The House of War. And here's the man.
Only 1 minute late, that's fine.
Charlotte, do you want me to sit there?
Please.
Right.
I was just introducing our guests.
You're just now giving me time to get hold of
Yeah.
a copy of the book.
I was letting Simon plug his book.
His new book.
The new book.
It's not his new book. It's not his first.
But it is germane to the topics we're talking about today.
Absolutely. No, it certainly is.
So as Alistair finds his breath, Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mayall, who has recently written The House of War, which sets a fascinating journey of 1300 years of Christendom and the Caliphate, which actually forms so much of the backdrop of what we're seeing today. Nicholas Hopton.
Sorry, forgive that. Oh, shameless plug.
No, be shameless.
Struggling author.
Nicholas Hopton is our former ambassador to Qatar, Yemen and Iran. So there's very little he doesn't know, and now is reinvigorating, revamping the Middle East Association, which has probably never been more needed, which is a cross-party, all-party organisation but focusing on commerce, trade and relationships. Our chairman, the Right Honourable Alistair Burt, needs no introduction, one of the most respected now former parliamentarians and Minister for the Middle East for many, many years. And Lina Khatib, who is an Associate Fellow of Chatham House. So if I may hand over to you as Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm also the record holder of coming from the exhibition centre to the top tier of the convention centre, which I have managed in about sort of no more than 90 seconds. So thank you very much indeed, and forgive me, the chairman should never be quite as timely for a meeting as this, so thank you very much. I'm delighted to welcome, I guess, all of whom I know and have worked with, and I suspect are known to many in the audience. We could not have a better trio of colleagues or a better room in order to discuss the UK's place after October the 7th. As some of you may know from my writings, I believe October the 7th changed everything in the Middle East. There is no going back to October the 6th, a false status quo that existed in the region. It's not going to be there anymore. Whatever the interpretation is of October the 7th and all that has followed, the fact that the world looks different now is very true. In relation to its alliances and friendships throughout the region, which are being tested by the experience of what the region is going through at present. Britain's influence still matters. The way in which we react to events, the actions we take, the things we say about friends and about those who are engaged in difficult actions in the region matter. People listen to us. They compare what the United Kingdom says about one place with what the United Kingdom says and does about other places, and there is an impact in relation to that. So the fact that these events are taking place and that it has an impact on the United Kingdom, how the United Kingdom is seen, and now a new government has to take forward that sense of what this is all going to mean as it unfolds. Because if what I say is to be the case, that the region is not the same, then there's no going back. It's something new that the British government will have to forge with other partners in the region. What is it going to look like? You couldn't have three better colleagues here who know the situation so well. So I'm going to invite Nicholas to speak first, Lina, and then Simon. I don't know if you set a time limit, Charlotte? About 5 minutes, because then we can engage both in questions between us, but of course questions from colleagues, and I'll be looking for all of you. If you catch my eye, I will do my best. And again, can I repeat what is often said here? Questions rather than statements. I suspect everybody in this room will have strong feelings about the events we're talking about, and it would be very easy to make a statement about it. Please, you have colleagues to ask questions of, and I'd be very grateful if you would shape your remarks into that if you possibly could. Nick, how do you see it?
Alistair, thank you very much. Charlotte, thank you for inviting me along, and it's great to be on a panel with such distinguished colleagues. The title of this session immediately begged a question for me, which I think, since I'm going first, I'll clear it out of the way straight away. And, you know, the UK's role globally after the 7th of October, that implies something about the UK's global role. So, for me, the question immediately is, what has the 7th of October 2023 got to do with the United Kingdom? And I think that's a legitimate question for many to ask in this country, and many more people in America, of course, which has a longer tradition of looking inwards rather than outwards at times, are asking that question. Why? What does it mean to us? Well, why should these terrible atrocities that took place, no matter how bad, affect Britain's place in the world? There was a person doing, I'm going to answer that, there was a person doing Alistair's job back in the 1960s, the job that Alistair used to do so expertly as the Minister for the Middle East. And it was a new minister, came into the Foreign Office, met the most senior official in the Foreign Office, and he said to the official, I've decided I'm not going to spend so much time on the Middle East as my predecessor did. Remember, this was post-Suez, it was a very dominant issue. I'm not going to spend time on the Middle East. I'm going to do other more important things. The senior official looked at the new minister and said, Minister, you may choose to ignore the Middle East, but the Middle East will not ignore you. Now, that truth remains true till today. UK interests are bound up with those activities, events in the region. Our security, our economy, our politics are all affected by what happens in the Middle East. And an event like the 7th of October impacts on our life here in the United Kingdom and on our interests. So how has this event in almost a year ago affected the UK's global situation? I would argue that the UK has been damaged. It's been damaged politically, economically and reputationally by what happened and what happened subsequently and our response. Domestically, there has been division, new division, anti-Semitism has risen within British society, and so people have been polarised in their opinions in a new way within the United Kingdom. Internationally, the UK has often appeared impotent to stop the escalation, despite best efforts by our politicians and diplomats, and military as well. And that's despite the fact that we have a very, very privileged status as a permanent member of the Security Council, which gives us very, very huge responsibility as well as influence. And when we have acted as a country, it struck me as being too little, too late. And sometimes, I'm afraid to say, politically misjudged. And I'm afraid I can speak as someone who is not partisan on these issues. It has been mistakes made by both of the parties in government, talking about winning the conflict as if it can be won, or deciding to cancel a few arms contracts, which is symbolic but has next to no real impact on the situation. And I think the problem here has been the real lack, no clear sense of what is the national interest, what is the UK's national interest at the moment. You may share my dismay when I heard the new Foreign Secretary talking about climate change being the overridingly important thing at the moment, the day before the pager attacks. And there's been a lack of understanding what the UK's national interest is and why this matters to us, and therefore a failure to articulate and implement a strategic policy. So lastly, where does this leave our relations with the key players and countries in the region? I would say we are in a certainly no better place than we were a year ago, and in many cases our relations are in a worse place than a year ago. I'll give you a few examples, important players. In Israel, I think the UK is seen as an inconsistent ally, lacking often the understanding of their existential fight that most Israelis seem to feel they are engaged in. In the Gulf, our allies there probably no longer see us as quite the pivotal player and spot diminishing influence from the UK, and that has grown in the last year. In the countries on the other side, in Iran, which I know well from my time there as ambassador, we are perceived as weak, simply following the US line too often. And in Yemen, we are now, which we weren't a year ago, the declared enemy of the Houthi ruling that failed state. We weren't that before. We have now become, along with the US and Israel, a declared enemy of the Houthi. Now, in conclusion, it hasn't been a good 12 months for the UK in the region. We must do better. And when the ceasefire and rebuilding start, which they inevitably must do sooner or later, we will play to our strength, I have no doubt. But we've got to start preparing for that. And I think above all, this is where the UK has real value to add. We need to remind people that it's all very well to treat the symptoms of a problem, but ultimately you need to address the cause. And as Alistair has very bravely and clearly articulated and championed in recent months, we will not address the cause of what's going on now until the state of Palestine is created. And I think when that, we can debate when that should happen, but there must be no doubt this is a role for the UK to articulate that as the long-term solution to what is going on and to prevent, as will inevitably happen otherwise, a repeat of this terrible situation within a few more years. Alistair, thank you.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. Lina.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your remarks. I will just add something to what you said about the domestic context before I talk about the international context. It is, of course, extremely important to recognize the rise of anti-Semitism. It is very concrete and unfortunate. And I'm not trying in any way to put these two things as being at the same level. However, it must also be mentioned that there has been a degree of Islamophobia expressed in the public domain as well. And this leads me to say, even when we are well-meaning in our messages, even when we are expressing things that we should be expressing, we need to be mindful of nuance and need to be mindful of generating trust. And I think this was reflected in the results of the election, in the sense that some people lost their parliamentary seats because some members of our community in the UK have been angry. And so I think this is a time to rebuild trust domestically, because the Middle East is affecting us here. When it comes to building trust, this also applies to our relationships abroad. I must be very frank. I was disappointed to see a member of the Conservative Party wearing a hoodie that says Hamas are terrorists, and that I agree with, Hamas are terrorists. However, there was no need for this hoodie to be carrying the colors of the Palestinian flag. Because in the eyes of people in Palestine who are not pro-Hamas, and there's many of them, trust me, this is not going to help us build trust when we at the same time say we need a state of Palestine to be established. Okay, supports a two-state solution. So how we express our messages matters, and we are not necessarily nailing it at that level. So I would be careful about what we say and how we say it at the same time. Now, let me come to some of the real issues in terms of international relations challenges. Rightly, as you said, the Israel-Palestine conflict remains something that we can't afford to ignore. And I think October 7th has shown us that. The price that Israel has paid is extremely high and was not necessary had this conflict been resolved. All those people slaughtered by Hamas would not have been slaughtered. If Israel is an ally, then we need to be mindful of the security of this ally and really step up diplomatically. And this applies also to Arab countries as well, who are our allies. And so, when it comes to that conflict, I think now we need to think of ourselves as having an opportunity, because the situation really is getting actually more complicated with what is happening with Hezbollah in Lebanon as well, and the potential spread of escalation across the Middle East. We can't afford to be seen as standing there and not engaging. Now, what I'm calling for is taking advantage of opportunities, even in the darkest of moments, because there is always an opportunity when you have a challenge. One thing that I personally have been talking about for several years is the issue of Iran's regional interventions in the Middle East and how destabilizing that is, not just for the region, but for the world. And frankly, this is something that governments for a long time now, both in the US and here in the UK, as well as Europe, have been ignoring. It's been the elephant in the room. There has been an artificial compartmentalization of the Iranian nuclear file and Iran's regional interventions. We, again, can't afford to apply this very erroneous framework to our approach to the Middle East. I think it's becoming more vivid with Hezbollah's actions that Iran is a destabilizing force in this region, and this is something that we need to engage with diplomatically. When it comes to Iran proxies, as you could see, Israel has attacked the Houthis in Yemen, has been attacking also Iran proxies in Syria. Iran proxies in Iraq have started also launching attacks on Israel. So we can't afford to, again, turn a blind eye to the destabilization that these proxies are causing in this region. Why Lebanon matters in particular is not just because of this regional destabilization that I talked about, but also because, let's not forget, Hezbollah is also a terrorist group that has in the past engaged in international terrorism. And my concern is, if Lebanon is not empowered to have sovereignty, to have state authority and bring Hezbollah to be under this state authority as a disarmed political actor. I'm saying this because I know it's not going to be possible in the short term to say eradication of Hezbollah, because Hezbollah has the support of a third of the Lebanese population, and these will feel politically vulnerable if they find themselves suddenly without representation. So what I'm saying is, let's maybe work with the pragmatists further down the line to push for a political containment in that scenario. But to get to that scenario, the Lebanese state needs to be empowered. And one great thing that the UK is doing is actually supporting the Lebanese army, because ultimately UN Resolution 01, which says only the Lebanese army should be in the area in the south of Lebanon bordering Israel, should be implemented, but Hezbollah is the one refusing. So I think Lebanon matters not just because of domestic security in Lebanon, not just because of Israel's security, not just because of regional implications, but also because if we do not rein in Hezbollah, and if it feels itself weakened but still able to cause harm, it can use international terrorism to compensate for its losses in the Middle East. We can also play a role in the Yemen peace process, and we are already playing a role, and now is the time to step up, because the good thing is when Hezbollah and the Houthis are weakened, this gives us an opportunity to have a bit more sway, but we need to use it. We need to use it, because otherwise, as I said, some of them at least can become international spoilers. Thank you.
Simon.
Yeah, thank you. And well, Lina's actually hit a really core element that I was going to talk about, which is Iran. What has happened with Hamas and what's going on in Gaza. It is interesting how difficult it is, I think, for policymakers to separate the issue of the Palestinian people and Hamas with its connections to the Muslim Brotherhood and with its supporters in Iran, and used as a cat's paw in many ways. And I'm sympathetic, although as a soldier we straddled the diplomacy, and Nick as a diplomat also was very conscious of what we in the military could bring to the party, and quite rightly too. We operate hand in glove, politically, diplomatically, militarily, and Britain has a role all through the region. The Hezbollah issue, I think, has been interesting. 7th of October, there was absolutely no reason for Hezbollah, if you're sat in Hezbollah headquarters, for Hezbollah to open a second front in the north. It was done absolutely, deliberately, willfully, and as a proxy of Iran. And Iran has played very fast and loose, as we know. Everything we're looking at now, Houthis, Hamas to an extent, certainly Hezbollah, what's going on in Syria, what happened in Iraq, what's going on in the Sahel. Hezbollah have been operating in the Sahel as well, alongside, dare I say, the Russian, now Africa Corps, what we all used to know as Wagner Group. They have proved to be an absolutely poisonous organisation there. And no one was out on the streets while Hezbollah was massacring Sunni Muslims who, to be honest with you, we were trying to support at the Arab Spring. So it's beginning to swim into focus. Matthew Syed, I thought, wrote very well in the Sunday Times, is there does come a point, and you can apply it to Putin's Russia, where you are forced to take sides. The nuances begin to fall away. But it is complex. The book I wrote, which was not this one, is, my goodness, we are still working out through the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. There's no doubt about it. So much of what we see today still has the echoes and resonances of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Now, it's not to take us all the way back there, but it is very interesting because we talk about the Middle East, Britain and the Middle East. What Middle East do we talk about? Are we talking about Turkey with its neo-Ottoman pretensions? We saw that during the Arab Spring, during the Civil War, during Iraq, the Kurdish region. Are we talking about Iran? That great regional power, that great civilizational power, who's and I think Lina's absolutely right to try and it's been sloppy thinking to try and ring fence the nuclear thing. We understand why, but it is the malign influence, and in many ways people will say that Iran has used the nuclear thing like a magician. Watch this hand. In the meantime, we're in with the Houthis, we're in with Hezbollah, we're in with Hamas, we're supporting Hezbollah's, as a thing. Has been a shocker, and they're very vulnerable. This is a really fascinating, that even before Nasrallah, the Iranians said, oh, the Israelis are trying to lead us into a trap. Well, they really are led into a trap at the moment, and it is fascinating which way that might go. Egypt's position, very, very ambivalent when it comes to Gaza. It's very easy to kick out at the Israelis, but the Rafah border crossing point is in Egypt's hands. The issue of the Muslim Brotherhood, really important. Go to the Gulf states. Listen to the Gulf states talk to us about BBC Arabic. The Abraham Accords, amazingly, have continued to stand up even a year because people know the cause of Palestine is extremely, deeply felt, sympathetically and empathetically, for every good reason. But people are very ambivalent about Hamas, and they are extremely ambivalent about the role of the Muslim Brotherhood. And again, you've only got to look at how come you have Iran that used to have Al-Qaeda operatives there, because there's an awful coalitions of convenience in that part of the world. I think that's where Britain, to an extent, we get caught. It's very difficult. I think Nick's basic point is that Britain has been, diminished is the wrong word, but found wanting in coming up with a really strong message, reflects the lack of confidence of an understanding of the complexity of the region. It is difficult. You often don't have time to nuance it and explain the background and go back to this. But our Gulf friends are very upset with us at the moment. But equally, they have to be upset with us because many of them view Iran as a much greater threat to them in the Middle East, if we're looking at Middle East players, than they do the state of Israel. And they view, as again we all know, they view the Muslim Brotherhood again as a bigger threat. How the Israelis are behaving militarily reflects on Israeli domestic policy. How Hamas are operating reflects politics. We used to say in Iraq that politics is also war by other means. And David Petraeus was a great one for using the expression, tell me how this ends. And the tragedy at the moment, particularly with regard, dare I say, to the two-state solution or what's going on in Gaza, what's going on, I think, in the idea of high command is, tell me how this ends. Are we just going, as a soldier, I can tell you, a bit like Ukraine, we can just go on killing people on either side. What is the politics within which this military action is taking place? And again, from that point of view, it is very difficult, as Nick said, to find a really coherent policy. I don't think we're alone. I think the Americans have been found wanting, I think the Germans have been found wanting, the French have been found wanting, etc. So I will simply say that it's not a question of looking for any sympathy for Britain finding itself misfooting. It is, to an extent, understanding that this region is one of the most complex in the world. And the undercurrents that go back, dare I say, through geography, history, religion, confessionalism, ideology, make taking really bold, consistent political positions very difficult. But I look forward to hearing the discussion. So, back to you.
Thank you very much. How I'd like to do this is I've got two questions. Taking chair's privilege to do this before I throw the floor open. I'm going to ask you, each of you, precisely what role do you think the United Kingdom should play in the next 12 months in the form of 3 options which you give to me as the Minister? And secondly, I'm going to ask the same question in relation to Iran. What are you asking me to do in relation to Iran? I'm just giving you notice. I'll change the order so that I won't have the same person ask at the same time. The reason I do this is that I'm used to analysis, and our analysis is good. Most experts, both in the Foreign Office and outside, know the subject and the area extremely well. They've either had the sort of experience that Nick and Simon have had, or they've had the analytical experience that Lina has and talks about. A minister can't deal with analysis on its own. Ministers have to do something, and the United Kingdom has to do something. And that's the hard bit. The analysis is great. You all know as much about the Middle East and what's happened in the last 10, 15, 90 years as the minister does. But you don't have to decide what to do. The minister does. And that's the hard bit. So that's really what I want to focus on, looking at Britain's global role since October the 7th. What does it actually mean in practical policy terms? What role should we play in the Middle East, recognising that life is not as it was immediately after the Second World War, that lots of things have happened in those years. We are not as we were. Nonetheless, we still have a reputation. I know from my work in the region how well our diplomats are seen. They speak the language. They're not the biggest, they're not the richest, they're not the most military powerful, but they are more trusted than some of our other allies. So with that background, what should we do in the Middle East? What 3 options? And then I'll come to Iran. But let's deal with that. I'm going to go to Nick first, then Simon, then Lina to sweep up.
I thought you were going to reverse the order, Alistair, but anyway,
I'll reverse it.
if the Minister asks, then we are there to obey. Well, I think since you posed 2 questions...
Come on to Iran separately.
You want me to come up with some quick ideas on...
No, the first question is, what role should Britain play, bearing in mind the analysis we've just done, in the Middle East? Leave Iran off for now.
Okay, so I can't dodge that. I was
No,
hoping
we'll
to
come to that
sidestep. Okay, so I think, as I was hinting at in my first intervention, the role the UK has, although we are diminished, I would argue, and although we haven't had a great year on the international stage in terms of the regional conflict, we are still the United Kingdom. We still have an extraordinary history behind us and understanding of the region. Sometimes we've got to avoid hubris, but generally we, as Alistair said, we do have experience and understanding of the region more than most outside of it. I think we have gone through a post-colonial period of reinvention, and we are now I think, quite clear about our role in the world until fairly recently. And I think that where we can add value, therefore, is by remembering how we have successfully added value in the last 4 or 5 decades during crises, since we rediscovered our mojo in the late 1970s, I would argue. And I think that suggests that the UK's unique strengths, and they are in many ways unique and acknowledged as such by our Western partners, as well as partners in the region and elsewhere. One is we have a unique convening power. This is partly because we are traditionally members of more different clubs, bringing together more different subgroups of countries, and we've been quite adept at using that to build consensus in support of acceptable outcomes when there are crises in the world. So our convening power, number one. Secondly, we should definitely leverage better our position as a P5 permanent member of the Security Council. Now, the Security Council has been blocked because of the Ukraine conflict, and before that because of what happened in Syria and the growing assertion of Putin generally, which has meant there has been much less ability to get the P5 on the same page on anything. That has been a problem, but I sense that the worst of that may be over, because actually, although the Ukraine conflict is still a major issue and arguably a more threatening geopolitical challenge than what is happening in Lebanon, Israel at the moment, that's debatable, but there may be more opportunity to build consensus in the Security Council than there has been, say, for the last 5 years. So I think we should leverage our unique position in the Security Council and out into the General Assembly, and therefore on a global level. And thirdly, as I mentioned, I think we should be preparing very seriously, using all the resource we have available, whether diplomatically, militarily, developmentally, the huge resource and understanding of the City of London, and also across other sectors in the UK, where our soft power is extraordinary. We should be preparing to leverage that for the day after. So yes, as others have said, we are involved to a marginal degree in trying to negotiate a ceasefire at the moment on Gaza, but the reality is we're not the main players. But we could be very influential players in the day after reconstruction. So I think that's it. Bringing people together, convening, Security Council role, and preparing for the day after.
Thank you. Simon, you don't have to come up with all the new ones.
The first one I was going to say is we do sometimes have to keep reminding ourselves just how what a reach the United Kingdom still has.
Yep.
Be it through the Commonwealth, be it through the EU still, although we're outside it. Certainly our, inverted commas, special relationship. This is, if we find the Middle East complex and complicated, I'm afraid our American friends really do. They're not historically minded. You know, if you roll out 1258, the sack of Baghdad, collapse of the Abbasid Caliphate. No. In America, it's all 1979 black turbans, Hezbollah, which so pisses the Iranians off, and I understand. UN, we are still a permanent member of the Security Council. We're going to have a view about that. I absolutely think we need to stay engaged. I think stepping back is not an option. I would absolutely, and I would say this to, and I did say this, I think, with Alistair when he was a minister, we need to use our armed forces. Most people in the region suffer a lack of security. I'm interested in what Lina said about contribution to LAF. I've been contributing to that, and I should have been there next week, I'm sadly think, because this is a moment of potential opportunity if we're looking at a particular country for Lebanon to reassert itself. I think we really do need to be very clear. I know Alistair doesn't want to talk about Iran yet, but so much leads back to Iran's malign influence across the region. And there is an opportunity. There are no tears being shed among many people in this region for the death of Nasrallah, for the death of the Hamas leadership in Lebanon, for the attack on the Houthis. These are seen as cat's paws of Iran, and Iran is looked as a major threat. So I think explaining what we've done, why in some ways we do support Israel. I know that can be difficult. I'm conscious there'll be people from Israel here. But we need to peg our colours. But we are going to have to be a critical friend. But you can't be a critical friend if you're not going to be really engaged as well. Britain should be really active diplomatic. But I really think I'd be saying to you, Minister, let's start using our armed forces more effectively to go into countries, particularly in the Gulf. We look at Saudi Arabia, quite a big country. We, funnily enough, but the other ones are very small, security very high. The other one, funnily enough, is China. And I don't know whether Nick would agree, but China is one of those countries exerting a restraining influence on Iran to avoid a conflagration. Because what we must not do is let this, if you can narrow it down to attacking Iran's proxies in the region, funnily enough, that benefits most people in the region. Arabs, Iranians, all of us. So that's what I really would do. I'd be just absolutely continue to be engaged, but we've got to be more practical. And I'm not punting for more money for defence, because I know, but let's use our military. That carries weight as well.
Okay. Lina, how do you say Britain actually doing something in the region?
Well, first of all, we are very liked in most of the region, which is great. So as we heard at the beginning, our convening power, let's use that to be a peace broker. And I think Yemen presents a particular opportunity. Iraq actually is another particular opportunity right now. Iraq is, of course, very complicated and sensitive, but I think we can do a bit more, especially that in Iraq, the US has recently been seen as taking a bit of a back seat. So I think at the level of political engagement, we can be there. And again, just, this moment presents us with an opportunity to have more robust diplomacy when it comes to Iraq, which perhaps we were not able to do a year ago. So I think playing the role of peace broker is very important. The second one I would say is to have conditionality when it comes to engagement with the countries that like us and want us to engage in trade, want us perhaps to give them aid. Egypt here is one such country. I think imposing conditions regarding economic reform and political reform is important. Lebanon, of course, looms large in this situation because Lebanon needs help and so far has been rejecting reform. Now is a vulnerable moment for Lebanon. Now's the time to push. And finally, I know this issue of a new security framework in the Middle East may be a pie in the sky for many, but again, the situation right now is urgent when it comes to this configuration. And I think there is an appetite for British help. So I think what I understood from the comments about going into Saudi Arabia is not sending, troops to kind of be positioned there, and but to support the security infrastructure in the Gulf. And I think this can be something very, very helpful for us because, as we know, it's not just aid that is also a form of diplomacy, it's also military trade, I would say, that is also part of diplomacy. So let's have coherence at those three levels. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. And my second question before I throw it open and hear yours. Iran. I've heard it all before. I've heard it for years. We know what Iran is up to. And I'm constantly told Iran is behind everything. Look at how Iran has extended its tentacles. What more do you want me to do? We sanctioned as many elements of Iran that we can. We tried to bring them into a deal on their nuclear aspirations, which was successful until Prime Minister Netanyahu encouraged Donald Trump to walk away from the deal. Was he wise to do that or not? We know a number of regional partners were not happy with the deal either, but is that still on the table? What do you want the United Kingdom to do further than what it's done? Should we be issuing ultimatums to Iran in order to force it to back off from its proxies? Are we threatening some action in relation to that? If one of our allies decides to bomb its nuclear facilities, do you want me to authorise UK forces to support that action? As I say, the analysis is great. What precisely do you want the British government to do differently that it's not doing at the moment? Lina?
Yes. One answer. Quite simple. Link the nuclear file with the regional intervention file. Right now, Iran itself at the UN just a few days ago indicated that they are willing to engage again on the nuclear file. All you have to do is say to Iran, fine, we will do that. However, in return, we want you to accept that Hezbollah disarms and hands its weapons to the Lebanese state. So basically, make curbing regional intervention a condition.
And Iran says no.
Well, they're
won't
now
put-
in a
we-
vulnerable position, so eventually they will have to say yes.
All right.
But you
okay.
need to push it, you need to put it on the table. It was never on the table before. Well,
Okay.
now is a good time.
Fine. Simon?
Well, cyber sounds a bit of a catch-all. That is a fragile state that is now it's extraordinary. The only upside I can see at the moment is it's lost credibility, it's lost confidence, it's brittle inside. There's problems in the Baloch, there's problems with the Kurds, there's problems in the Khorramshahr area with the Arabs. There's a generational issue there at the moment. There's deep dissatisfaction with the amount of money that is supporting terror around there. I would absolutely turn my firepower now on the complete internal structure of Iran. By firepower, I happen to say, information operations, cyber. I'd be absolutely threatening it totally and just say, we're now coming for you. Now, I don't say if anything disastrous happened in Iran, we wouldn't be faced with other problems. But you've now got to say your survival is to say there is a window of opportunity here to really come at the Iranian regime at the moment, and I think we should collectively seize it. And given their alignment now with Russia, it's absolutely in our interests to break that link with Russia as well. So I think, I always go Pezeshkian, and many of the, what I say, call moderates maybe, I would imagine, and the Ayatollahs are deeply worried about Iran's short-term future.
Okay.
And it's brittle, and it should be threatened at least.
So you're suggesting not regime change, but policy change by Iran?
Without policy change, there is a very strong probability you may get regime change, but catalysed from internally.
All right.
But it can be supported externally. And I think there are consequences. There should be consequences.
Nick?
Well, I'll give you a few ideas, Alistair, if I may. I think the stakes have never been higher in the Middle East at the moment. The doom mongers will say this is both an existential moment for obviously the terrorist groups who are under huge pressure, but also potentially for the regime in Tehran, and also some have said over the last year, suggested that if Israel gets this badly wrong, it could be existential for Israel. Now, I'm not saying any of those are right, I'm just saying this is a moment when the stakes have never been higher. It feels to me, not that I was particularly politically conscious at the time, this has echoes of the early 1970s and the height of the Cold War. And what happened then was significant. You had the Helsinki Accords, you had the creation of the OSCE. Now, Lina's alluded to some sort of security cooperation agreement across the region. Now, others, including Zarif before and when he was foreign minister in Iran, talked about some sort of OSCE for the Middle East. And it was always dismissed at the time because it was coming at the wrong time from the wrong people. But I think that is probably somewhere we might hold up there as a better norm state than what we've got at the moment. Now, the way to get there, Minister, you asked for 3 recommendations, would be I would take advantage of the fact that Iran has a new president and a prime minister, because he's played down his role. In fact, Pezeshkian is a moderate. He's not a reformer. He is very much the supreme leader's man. He's there because Khamenei wants him there. And why does he want him there? Because he realizes that to achieve his main goals, which are one, the continuation of the Islamic regime, but secondly, a smooth succession when he dies and passing on to someone who will carry on the kind of approach he's espoused over the decades, he needs to try something else because it wasn't working under the predecessor Raisi, who died in the summer. So Pezeshkian has been brought in, and a very mixed government. It's a new kind of government in Iran. Now, this doesn't mean that Iran is about to change for the better. What it does mean is that the top of the Iranian regime is looking to try and force some sort of engagement as opposed to opposition and conflict with the West. Now, they're watching what happens in the US elections, of course, but I think that's number one. You've got one building block there which is different from previously, a new type of Iranian government and approach, potentially. They may be forced into conflict very quickly and that will disappear, but at the moment it's still there. Secondly, whatever we choose to do, and whatever, if we are aiming towards some better form of norm state, we need to be working hand in glove with Washington. They want to work hand in glove with us. Whoever is in the White House, we can do that. And we can do that better than anyone else. So we need to be re-engaging and stepping up. We need to appoint envoys. We need to show that we are still serious players on the region in a way that we haven't been for a few years. And lastly, I would say very crucial partners in a new way, which they weren't when we did the JCPOA 10 years ago, is the Gulf states. We need to work with them as partners, not only tell them what we're doing in the negotiations, we've got to listen to them and involve them. And that is the way through. You noticed already that the Saudis have hosted the Iranians in Riyadh during the last year. They are playing the role without us. We weren't invited, nor were the Americans. So we've got to get into that tent, we've got to work with the Gulf partners, engage the Americans, and work as best we can, open up more dialogue, test the will of the Iranians, and try and get to some better security arrangements for the whole region.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. I think it's good to end the contributions at this stage from the front with the sense that no matter how awful the circumstances appear and have been since the atrocious attacks on October the 7th, that sense that because we can't go back to October the 6th, it's not inevitable that we go back to something worse. We could go back to something better, and there are opportunities for that. I think that's been very interesting. Now, we have about 40 minutes, which is a good length of time. I will just take questions as and when I see them. If you keep your hand up each time, I will get round to everybody. And again, if I may plead, questions as short as you can make them so that we can get as many as possible rather than statements. And gentlemen at the far side, if you say, well, you don't have to say who you are, just launch away.
My name's John Wolf and I'm representing Islington.
Yes, sir.
Talking about Iran, how stable do you think the regime is? And leading on from that, is that what can the West collectively do to help the Iranian opposition, people like Reza Pahlavi?
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello, Marwan Riash from Cities of London and Westminster. So, when Russia illegally invaded Ukraine, they were dealt with immediately using sanctions. And they were rendered a pariah state by the West and most of the international stage. When Israel was found to be in violation of international law after the ICJ ruling in July, where was the West's response?
Okay. Let's take those two, because they're both quite meaty. The double standards that people claim in relation to Ukraine and Israel. Right, and Simon hasn't answered one first yet, so you start.
Well, on the first one, I've referred to my earlier thing. I think the Iranian regime is, there's a lot of death in a nation, but is brittle. You know, the population pyramid as across the whole region is remarkably weighted for youth. And therefore, there's a generational and there's a gender issue there. But in my mind, when I talked about the cyber attack, what I actually meant was information operations as much as anything else, that you actively go. It's quite extraordinary. And Nick would closer to Iran than I am. The effect that what the reform movement in Saudi Arabia is having on the Iranians is, I think, quite significant, because we know the Iranians have a very high sense of their own worth as a civilizational power. And
so more money to the BBC Farsi side.
Well, it could be that, but I'm talking about actively quite aggressive information operations that goes out deliberately to target it. So I would simply say there are vulnerabilities there that we've referred to before that could be played upon, and the biggest worry in Iran, of course, is regime survival. So what they do internally, I hate to say, is their business, inverted commas, but up to a point. But what they do externally is causing a massive threat to the region and the wider area. So I am all for really beginning to double down on this, and as I say, it's a window of opportunity because their proxies are getting a hell of a kicking at the moment. Ukraine is fighting, it's a state-on-state war. These are uniformed people. I am very interested in the fact that we never talk about casualties, and it's always civilians, because everybody who is there, the Palestinians, or you might even say Hezbollah or Hamas, are not fighting in uniform. And as a soldier, I can tell you this is really, really tough. And other people are breaking the law by using civilian apartments to hide weapons, religious buildings moving people around in order to provide human shields, taking hostages and abusing them. So it is not a binary issue. And if you're saying, well, if I can't come at your fighters because you have created the conditions under which you are breaking international humanitarian law, and all I have to do is stand by and say, I think that is probably not the way to do it. And I think I would commend some of the restraint that the IDF have had to operate on, given the conditions in which they are confronting what they believe is an existential threat to their nation.
Lina, Iran and the double standards issue.
Yeah, I'll just add regarding Iran, I wouldn't necessarily pick Reza Pahlavi as the face of the opposition. I think in the West, in the past, we've made that mistake before, to have kind of a favored person. Let's leave it to the Iranians to decide who they want to be the leader of the opposition. But what I would caution against with Iran is what happened with the Arab Spring scenario, in the sense that at that time there were many people in the region who genuinely wanted democracy, genuinely wanted reform, and got all kinds of wonderful rhetoric from the West that did not translate into action. And so the last thing any opposition needs in Iran is for us to say, yes, we are on your side, and then let them down. To be honest, it's better for us to say nothing and do nothing, but there are ways, I think, even though, I'm not asking for intervention as such in Iran, but there are ways to empower, reform-oriented voices across the Middle East, and I think this is a worthy cause, and we can do it through soft power. When it comes to the other issue, it's a tricky one. I'm not an expert in law in any way, so I can't really weigh in, but what I will say is the following. Because in the Ukraine scenario, it was Russia that was the aggressor from day one. So Israel, we may criticize, and rightly so, the extent, the way it has been conducting its operations. However, Israel can credibly say we are acting in self-defense because they were the ones who were attacked. Same with the scenario of Lebanon now with Hezbollah. It was Hezbollah that fired the first rocket at Israel, not the other way around. So Lebanon can't go to the UN and say, oh, we are now being attacked by Israel. Well, actually, your rogue actor attacked Israel first, so you can't really claim as much protection under international law when you basically have been attacked by a terrorist group.
I strongly agree with Linda's point about we should avoid the mistakes we made during the Arab Spring, which were made with the best of intentions, but there was a lot of misreading and false steps, which has not made the region any more stable. The UK, of course, has form when it comes to Iran, not perhaps quite as much as we are credited with by the Iranian people, who think behind everything that happens in the country there is a British spy. It's not like that. But we have historical form, so we, the UK, need to tread particularly carefully. I also agree with Lena's point. The problem with the leadership of the Iranian opposition, and this was particularly apparent during the Mahsa Amini protests in late 22 and 23, there is no leadership. That is the problem. They're not coherent. They have thousands of people on the street all the time. Iran is a very strange place. It's a theocracy. They tolerate huge amounts of demonstrations. In August, I'm told, there were 500 demonstrations in different parts of Iran during August. On any day you might find 10,000 Iranians marching against this or that issue. They are tolerated up to a point, and then suddenly they're not, and it gets very messy and horrible. But the problem is they're very divided. There is no clear leadership, so I think that is something we must always bear in mind. And on the Iranian question, again, I would just simply say, change historically in Iran tends to have happened when there is an alignment between external pressure and internal pressure. Now, you could say there is external pressure at the moment and there are some internal pressures also. Are they aligned? We will see. But it isn't going to be the UK that changes the regime in Iran. And double standards, I'm not sure it's so clear-cut, to be honest. And all I would say is that on Israeli actions, some of which have been claimed to have been war crimes, a process has been started. And there is an ICC investigation, collection of evidence going on, and based on previous conflicts and investigations in similar situations, the ICC tends to end up with a process that leads to a long trial process, and justice, to an extent, is often done. So At this stage, I think it's premature to say that there's double standards. I think that any Israeli war crimes and individuals who may have been responsible will probably find in due course they are held to account by the ICC.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take 3 more questions now. Lady at the back, number 1, lady there, and gentleman at the back. So those 3 for now. Yes, ma'am.
My name's Charlotte Eager, and I am a journalist, and I also run a project with refugees, and we're currently working with a lot of refugees in Hounslow, most of which are Iranian. Rather to my surprise, and I wonder what the panel know about this, there seems to be a wave of a sort of ripple of evangelical Christianity sweeping Iran at a very grassroots level. And I thought originally these people thought it was a wizardry to say they converted to Christianity once they got to the UK, but that frankly isn't the case. The vast majority of people, I wonder what the panel knew about it.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am?
Two-state solution, is there still enough political willingness on either side to pursue this? And is it to Britain's interest to see it through?
Thank you. Gentlemen?
And if I may, 2 questions, but following up from the first one. So to Sir Simon, you mentioned military use of the armed forces in the Middle East. I was wondering if you had any particular actions or effects in mind, and in what country, in addition to what we're currently doing with the training mission. And then to the rest of the panel, as a result of any military activity that the UK would do, what would be the political will to take British surface personnel casualties after in Afghanistan?
Right, in order to get through as many questions as possible, I'll ask for someone to lead on it, and then if either of the other 2 want to contribute, but each will not feel the necessity to contribute to each one. I think, Nick, you lead.
Shall I pick one? And then I think the evangelical Christianity, Lottie, is a very interesting question. It's absolutely a real phenomenon, as well as sometimes misused by nefarious people traffickers and others, and other well-meaning churches in the UK who are hoodwinked, and there have been some high-profile examples of that, where bad things have been done by people who've converted, so seemingly converted, as asylum seekers in order to accelerate their cases. But in Iran, there is very much a movement towards non-conformist Christianity, evangelical churches. It's illegal. Home churches are illegal in Iran. People go to prison. I think, I haven't got the figures of the evidence at my fingertips, but I think people are executed.
I don't think they're executing them, which implies that there are loads of them. Because if there was a few, they could execute them, but I don't think they are.
Well, I don't have the figures, as I say, but I think some. You're absolutely right. There are different denominations. There is even an Armenian Christian representative who sits in the Majlis, in the parliament. And there is also a Jewish representative in the Iranian parliament, which is interesting. But they don't exactly have a lot of power. You might think they were slightly kind of religion washing, or whatever the expression is. But I think the phenomenon is real. Most Christianity in Iran is persecuted heavily. I saw that myself when I was there. I tried to support the only surviving Catholic priest in the country who had been there on and off since the 70s. He was finally pushed out of the country during a period of pressure on the churches. The way they got him out, very sophisticated, because often the pressures are sophisticated. They didn't kick him out, they didn't make his life intolerable or anything like that. They just didn't renew his work visa after 30 years. So the pressure is real, the phenomenon is real. Christian home churches are very brave, and they are spreading.
Lina, 2-state, still on the cards or not? And is it in the UK's interest?
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
Converting from Islam to any other religion is illegal in Iran. And this is why. So it's not, it's very different from the people who are already Christian, such as the Member of Parliament. But what you're talking about is people who were originally Muslim converting to Christianity, and that's why they're being executed and persecuted. So it's important to note that. 2-state solution. Well, we, as I was saying in my comments, we are living with the consequences of the absence of that. Had there been 2 states existing peacefully, we would not be seeing so many people slaughtered in Israel and in Lebanon and in Gaza and elsewhere. And so, of course, it's in everyone's interest for this to happen. And do we have a stake in it? Well, of course. I mean, let's not forget, going back to history, Britain does have a role to play in the situation in Israel, Palestine. The Balfour Promise keeps being invoked in the Middle East every now and then. And so we can't claim that this is something that's not to do with our actions, even though that was more than 100 years ago. But still, we have a responsibility, I think, to be involved. And at the same time, it's in our national interest for this conflict to be resolved.
How do you see the many voices in the Palestinian community that say, no, it's time for one state where everyone will have the same rights. Of course, the Jewish community will be protected under law, just as they would be in any other place. Thinking has moved on from two-state amongst some to something different, or a set of confederations or the like. What credibility do you give to that at the moment?
To be very honest, I'm talking about the two-state solution because this is the internationally agreed peace framework for that conflict. However, if people in Israel and Palestinians decide to come up with a different model, then who are we in the international community to tell them what that model should look like?
Okay. Simon, press a little bit further on your...
Yeah, I mean, the legacy I'm very proud of is the new naval base in Bahrain. Facility. Naval support facility. And I would actually recommend it as a model for other parts of the world, be it West Africa or the Far East. The British military are still extremely highly regarded. You've got to be careful. We know that Al-Qaeda made a very big play about, inverted commas, Christian troops, particularly the Americans, in the land of the two holy cities. And one of the reasons they moved to Al Udeid base in Qatar, it's got to be to tango. But we really, again, need a sort of political lead. I think we've got to be out offering them, not waiting for people to come. I think we extend Sandhurst, Cranwell, Dartmouth, Staff College, all of these places for places. They help us, we think, educate or cultivate militaries, senior leaders who will, we believe, again, conduct themselves on operations in a manner we'd feel comfortable with. I think a lot more liaison, but it takes a degree of political will and communication to the British public, because you're right, once you go out to parts of the world, you are to an extent setting yourself up to be attacked, and you need to have a good narrative as to why the British military are bringing back body bags. But the reality is the nature of the world we're in requires leadership to say it is one of the levers that a British government can pull in support of its own interests and the interests of its allies. So I'd say be imaginative, stay engaged, alongside a political, diplomatic, economic. It should be factored into every consideration of any engagement, bilaterally or regionally.
A lady there, I saw a gentleman at the back and lady there. Round to everyone.
When I look at the war, I often look at it in terms of proportionality. I think we forget the fact that in recent years we haven't had a modern history, we haven't had a war that's cut off electricity, cut off to such a huge scale. So when I look at it, I look at what's going to come next in terms of the reconstruction. Middle Eastern countries are quite rightly saying we're not going to rebuild if it's going to be flattened in 2 or 3 years' time. Who is responsible for the reconstruction? We're sitting on a massive pandemic waiting to happen because of the huge health consequences of the region. And then finally, with Israel, how does the West respond if Israel say, we're not reconstructing it, we're not letting any building materials come through?
Thank you very much.
Firstly, in view of the presence of the Saudi Arabians, do we really believe that we should continue to tolerate their conduct in the Yemen? And secondly, does the panel really think that the Iranians are going to go away as long as the Israelis behave the way they are doing? If the Israelis were kept on their same borders, there would be no need for Iranian support in the Middle East, and they would be very happy. Right, the secretary to the ambassador there once, but Iran would be very happy to come back into the West given the opportunity. But at the moment, the behaviour of the Americans in Iran is preventing Iran from changing its allies.
Thank you very much. Madam there.
You've touched on most of the key global actors. I'm just interested in what you think about the role that India could play, without going too broad, but considering the GCC is India's biggest trading bloc.
And that route that was down into the Middle East that you've spoken of, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Who would like to take which out of that? If we go to Simon first, which of those would you like?
Well, they're all of huge interest.
What about Yemen?
I would say Yemen, but I'd also say on the reconstruction, it really is, as military men, it is the great cry, tell me how this ends. This is Clausewitz. I want to know what your political objectives are so I can then, apply force where it's appropriate, apply restraint where it's appropriate. Give me something, and back to why, if you're getting the politics right, you'll make my job as a soldier easier. And that's what we have done in many campaigns, and sometimes arguably we got it wrong. Iraq was a classic case. So I haven't got an answer to what you said, but by goodness, I wish there was at least some discussion going on about it, because, you know, I have no time for Hamas, but I totally understand where there is huge sympathy for the Palestinians. You've got to hold out hope in these things, otherwise you're just there. So I just say that because it's not a helpful answer, but just to say people like ourselves in uniform are asked to go and conduct operations in really complex environments, need a political environment in which we think our application of force has will enable a positive outcome. Yemen is such a difficult one. I was brought up in Aden, and of course it has been a coup d'etat by the Houthis, and it's become now a challenge to the international world order by the attacks on maritime traffic, albeit that they've used, technically it's Israeli whatever thing. And again, this is going to have to be tackled, and although they're not cat's paws, some of you track it back to Tehran. Tehran, of course, using again, I don't want to put Iran as this conspiracy theory, but there's no doubt about it, it suits Tehran to use its proxies through the prism of Shiism supporting it, even though they're not ethnically the same, to give us a whole raft of problems. Somewhere along the line, the Houthis as another parasitic organisation. That population of Yemen, do you know the population of Yemen? Anybody?
7 million?
It's massive.
35 million. It's bigger than Saudi Arabia. That is why the fact that we cannot find a solution to the Yemenis problem gives us its huge humanitarian problem, over and above other humanitarian problems in the region. So again, just not a great answer about what we do, but just it is important to get this right.
Lina?
When it comes to reconstruction, I see it as an international responsibility for all the reasons that I mentioned about all of us being indirectly responsible for how things eventually played out. So it has to be a global endeavor.
Now, both Saudi Arabia and the UAE have made very clear and very publicly there is no money going into the reconstruction of Gaza without a serious indication of a Palestinian state or self-determination of the Palestinians. Do you expect them to hold to that? And the question was, what happens if Israel doesn't agree?
This is the thing. We keep seeing history repeat itself, but each time it's worse. October 7 was the equivalent of September 11. Can we afford to see another mass slaughter like that happen in the region? I don't think we can. And if this doesn't spur everyone into action to really take seriously the need to have peace at the end of this very bloody war, then I don't know, maybe we should all just give up and move to another planet, because this really would make me lose faith in humanity, because this is honestly a scenario that I never thought I would see in the Middle East. With all the brutality that had happened, this really exceeded anything that had taken place in this region, and we can't afford to let it happen again.
Just a few thoughts. I'm fascinated, actually. I've just realised the words, or letters, EU, have not come up in this conversation. We're going for over an hour. And Alistair wouldn't forgive me if I didn't bring them in at some point, I think, because they are relevant in whatever way we personally believe. They are very relevant. I'm sorry, I missed that. Sorry. But the way the EU is particularly relevant is to the first question about who can play a significant role in the reconstruction of the Levant, which is turning into the conflict more generally. And because, you know, let's not forget, Syria is still unfinished business as well, and so on. So there is a whole region already devastated, and it's probably going to get worse. Being frank, we may not be anywhere near the end of this conflict in worst case scenarios. I think the victor, if anyone does actually declare victory at any stage realistically, has a very strong responsibility for cleaning up afterwards. That's always been the case. And I think that the EU, who were before traditionally the biggest donor to development projects in Palestinian territories, have a big role to play there. So did the GCC, but as others have noted, there needs to be the conditionality needs to be met. I don't know whether the EU would impose the same kind of conditionality. The Israeli position under the present government is very hard to judge, is all I would say. Simon said a lot about Yemen already. All I would say is, from my experience there as ambassador immediately after the Arab Spring in Sana'a, when we did actually have an embassy on the ground, and Alistair visited as minister, so knows it as well as I do. My experience is that the future of Yemen will depend heavily on Saudi Arabia playing a strong, positive role. And that has always been the case. I think it will continue to be the case. It hasn't gone the way it should have done in the last decade. But the future of allowing Yemen to rebuild, to go beyond the present awful oppression from the Houthi, and create a viable state at some point in the future, Saudi Arabia will have to play a major role in that. Just briefly on Iran's future, I don't really agree that it's the US and its allies who are preventing Iran move forward. I think it's the Islamic Republic and the regime in Iran, and particularly the vested interests of the IRGC and SEPA, which are holding it back. Some estimates, it's very difficult to get proper opinion polls, although some do come out of Iran, say 15% of Iranians strongly support the regime, 15% don't, and they would like to see the regime overturned. And then most Iranians don't want another revolution, but they don't like what they've got at the moment, and they'd like to see some evolution. So that's what is holding Iran back. It's that the regime is oppressing the Iranian public from evolving from a very theocratic, limited democracy into something more meaningful and into a better future for them. Because at the moment, life in Iran is pretty dreadful. And on India's role, I'm conscious none of us have addressed this. Do you want to address it, Mr. Chair? Can I pass that back to you, Alistair? I mean, beyond saying that India is obviously very important to all this.
I'm clearly a growing economic power, and that pathway from the Middle East into India and Southeast Asia was an imaginative stroke for the future of the Middle East. What its diplomatic credibility and power would be at the moment, I genuinely don't know. India is not a state that I know, or its foreign affairs, so I can't answer that question particularly. But it's a good question on the basis that all the rest of us have failed over the years. The West has tried, we've had countless efforts in the Middle East peace process. China, of course, were influential in relation to the Saudi-Iran deal, though Iraq did virtually all the work and the Chinese came in at the end. But maybe new actors are out there that people can trust slightly more than the actors of the past, who they perhaps blame for not succeeding with this. Lina?
I'll talk about India.
Please.
When it comes to Saudi Arabia and the UAE in particular, and also Oman, India is growing in terms of trade relations, especially with those three, and it's very important to them economically. One key thing for India also is that it hosts a port that Iran uses. And this is something that gives India a particular pragmatic edge in the region that I think can be leveraged further down the line when it comes to trade. I already mentioned it, very important, but at the same time, Saudi Arabia in particular is balancing its security relationship and engagement with Pakistan and India so that it is not seen as being in any one camp. We should be careful not to think that any Gulf country is pivoting east rather than engaging with the West. I think what is happening at the moment is pragmatic engagement because they see the benefit, but definitely the prioritization of relationships with the West will always be there. So India is not a replacement, but as I said, it has a pivotal role that it can play.
I'm going to finish just before 5 because I know Simon has to leave very promptly, so I'll take another round of questions. I will try and do my best, so I'm asking for short questions if I possibly have. Gentleman at the back and madam there. And then, sir, a fourth. Thank you.
Yeah. How do we counter that some of the Gulf allies are themselves destructive forces in the region? I'm thinking, for instance, the UAE and Sudan.
Gulf forces in the region and Sudan. Yes, sir, at the back.
How do we manage reconstruction if victory hasn't been declared or occupation doesn't take place, as in how do we deal with the instruction with someone like Assad in Syria, whatever?
Yeah, on the reconstruction point, I'm afraid it is the Iranians and the Russians who have contacts in Syria. My name is Mike Saleh, I work in Buckinghamshire. So my question is, how did Britain allow such a big slip up in Syria in terms of its own interests? And how can we rebuild that interest and influence in Syria again?
Thank you very much. Ma'am?
My name's Rosewell Karina. I'm a journalist from the New Arab. My question is actually quite similar to the gentleman at the front here about the UAE and Sudan, but also about Saudi Arabia and the human rights violations that are still going on there in terms of executions, restrictions on women's rights. And we're seeing that Saudi Arabia and the UK, amongst other Western countries, are increasing ties, whether that's through culture, sports, entertainment, and so on. But at the same time, it seems that our government has been happily turning sort of blind eye to these violations that are still present in the country, or they should be done about.
I'm Jib from Voice of Islam Radio. My question is to respond to Hamas. Was it proportionate and just in your opinion?
Thank you very much. Lina.
Yeah, sure. What I will say broadly, and this applies to every country in the Middle East, not just Arab countries, but literally every country in the Middle East, but also further afield. Wherever we see them doing something positive, I think it's good for us to be on board and bring them with us on that journey. And I see in the Gulf, despite all the problems that people rightly point out, I see a move towards modernization. I see a move towards liberalization. And I think taking a hammer and pounding them on the head is not the right way to go about it. I think we should be nurturing even small pockets of optimism, even small steps towards reform and openness. And I think this would help them and help us build trust, and I think this will eventually lead to smoother relationships than looking at things from a very black and white point of view, or, which is equally actually problematic, ignoring the reforms and dismissing them and saying things like, oh, all this investment in infrastructure in Saudi Arabia geared towards tourism and sports is sports washing. So let's just ignore it and dismiss it. The reality is they are modernizing, and this is not about sports washing. This is about actually creating an infrastructure for their future economy. And I think we should do the opposite. We should take them seriously, and we should be on board, and we should help them.
Simon?
I just would absolutely like to reiterate exactly what Lina said. I'm sick of people in a country where we've got our own flaming cultural, social, economic problems going around lecturing other people. Within the bounds of their own culture, they're moving ahead at an extraordinary rate. If anybody thinks there's anything better than the House of Saud coming after if the House of Saud was to collapse, they're not there. Go to these countries. It is quite remarkable what is going on there. But equally, I can wander around the streets of Riyadh or Jeddah or Dubai or Abu Dhabi quite safely at night. I can see children playing in the things. I don't see instances other than Westerners of drunkenness and promiscuity and attempts to bloody take drugs. So I really do caution people about being arrogant enough. We're not speaking from a position of strength any longer. And I think we need to be very, very careful. We want to align our interests with people who are fundamentally broadly on our side. We cannot expect them to have a whole series of cultural assumptions that just match ours, and if they're not prepared to go with us, what crass arrogance, that we should be dismissing them. These are hugely important players in this part of the world. I wish Iran was going in the same direction as Saudi Arabia is. We'll always find things where we can be critical, but by goodness, can they find things to be critical about us? And I do think actually the whole thing about GCC, your point is very well made. We saw it in Libya. We saw it in the Arab Spring, we see it in Sudan, I see it wider, Ethiopia, Eritrea. This is what happens when you get a multipolar world. Everybody assumed it would be a whole load of benign Americas. It's not. It's China, it's India, it's Russia, it's the Islamic Republic of Tehran. We've got to work out these countries are mature, they're hedging their bets, and they will go with their national interests. They will dine a la carte now. And if it suits their interests, I'm afraid to be intervening in Sudan. I think it's a disaster they're doing so. They will do it. But this is what's happening. From my mind as an Englishman, a Brit, we need a compelling narrative. The narrative of, during the Cold War and even in the period, the Francis Fukuyama narrative, which I never totally bought, I was rather more Huntington. We need to regrow our own strength, our own confidence on our narrative, and then we can make that hopefully an attractive narrative to our friends. But at the moment, people are hedging for very understandable reasons, I think. Not necessarily to our benefit, but they see it in their benefit.
Nick?
Well, I think Lina and Simon have answered most of those questions collectively extremely well, and I'd agree with them. The UK's role at this point with the countries of the region has to be, wherever possible, to extend critical friendship, dialogue, and be sensitive enough, based on our own experience and relationships over a long period with these countries, to know when it's best to be messaging in public and when in private. And I think this has brought us full circle, in a way, back to my point at the beginning, that why the Middle East still matters to us. It is extremely important to the UK, our security, politics and economy, and I think this discussion has shown that brilliantly, so thank you very much.
Okay, anybody just want to hazard a word on proportionality in relation to Gaza?
Well, I'm happy just to say two words, really. One is hostages, and the second is ICC. I think the Israeli government were absolutely right to try and recover their hostages and to respond to what is an appalling series of atrocities on the 7th of October. And they have international law and right on their side in going after the perpetrators of those terrible crimes. At the same time, they need to stay within the bounds of international law, and that will be for the ICC to judge in due course following their investigations.
Two things here, if I may, just to finish. We are on time. Firstly, in relation to CMEC, and I hope that you've really appreciated this extraordinary panel and the work of CMEC. On your chairs, you'll find a flyer. If you scan the QR codes on the flyer, you'll find you can sign up to the daily update, and I get the daily update every day, as I'm sure a number of embassies do, from CMEC, of what's happening in the region, with information directing us to articles and things that are happening. It's really worthwhile. So please, if you can sign up for the daily update, that would be great. And my last word is to thank Charlotte and the CMEC team for having this, to thank all of you for dealing with really difficult and sensitive matters in the way in which you have. No polemics, no great speeches. Everybody knows that these circumstances cut extremely deep for all. And to be able to do that in the company of very talented people who know the situation very well, who answered all the questions as respectfully as possible and gave you some really interesting insights into what's happening in the region. We're honoured by some in the audience who really know their business and have given us their time. Honoured by all of you being here. Please show your appreciation for a great panel.
Mr. Chairman, for once you are not being allowed the last word. Could we have an equally vigorous round of applause for the Chairman for absolutely splendid job he's done this afternoon? Thank you very much indeed.